Good evening, everyone. Julia O'Hara here, and I'm joined by Ana Hernandez, Assistant Vice President of USF Housing and Residential Education. We're live and here to provide information about the on-campus housing experience, specifically focused on the COVID-19 isolation protocol and support for our on-campus residents. So type your questions in the comments and we will answer you live on the show. But first, Anna's going to provide some updates and some information to some pre-planned questions. And as we get through that, keep your questions coming in and we'll get to them in a little bit. Hi, Anna, how are you? Absolutely. Thanks for being here. All right, so let's start, Anna, with just that overview that we talked about USF's COVID-19 testing and isolation protocol.
Sure. My hope is that many of our families saw the great news coverage that we had on the Today Show today, talking about the success that we've had with regard to mitigation factors and some control and the great personal responsibility and personal care that our students are taking to try to reduce the occurrences of the coronavirus on the USF campus. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing to try to support that, and then also acknowledge that we have cases and we're going to have cases moving forward. And I know that that can be some sort of create some anxiety on top of the normal separation and transition into a college environment. And so that's why we wanted to spend some time today and just help people understand what's happening on campus. So I wanted to start off with our testing and our surveillance protocols that we have. There are several things that we're doing at the USF campus. One is environmental testing, which involves us swabbing the surfaces, high-touch surfaces throughout the residential community, actually throughout campus. High-touch surfaces being door handles, elevator buttons, light buttons, table surfaces, chairs, those types of things. And what we do on a regular basis is we take samples throughout the residential community to see if there is the presence of the virus. And if it is that there's a presence of the virus, then we go to our next step protocol, which I will talk about in a minute. We also are doing randomized testing throughout campus. That involves taking tests of COVID tests for a certain percentage of residential students, off-campus students, faculty, and staff, so the entire USF community. And both of those combined, the environmental testing and the random testing, allows us to identify if there may be a pocket or a location where there seems to be a presence of a virus. And usually it helps us because these are probably asymptomatic cases. And so what our next step would be is we would do an evaluation, not housing and residential education, but the COVID response team, the medical professionals on the campus, and identify if there's a need to do pool testing. And what pool testing is we identify a select group of students, could be in a residence hall, could be people that are part of a group or something like that. And then we do pool testing, which involves collecting saliva samples and running that in a group of 4 or 6 samples to see if anybody in that 4 or 6 group shows the presence of a virus. If anybody in that group of 4 or 6 comes up positive, then those are the individuals that are contacted by Student Health Services to get an actual PCR test, which would be the nasal swab. So those are the types of things that we're doing. The reason that we do pool testing is it allows us to quickly identify cases or the presence of the virus in a large group of people very quickly instead of just doing the PCR test. So I just wanted to let people know that that's sort of the testing process that happens. On top of that, we also, if students are feeling ill, we encourage them to report that in their daily symptom tracker, which every student, faculty, and staff member that are coming to campus need to complete. And if it is that they are feeling ill, they will be coached or counseled by a medical professional that will do some outreach after we tell them to stay at home or stay in their residence hall to see if a test would be appropriate. If a test is appropriate, they can make an appointment, go to Student Health Services where the tests are free of charge. And then that's where a conversation may occur of, is there higher risk behavior that they may have been involved in group settings, or something that would lead them to believe that they may be positive, that they were around somebody that was positive, et cetera. And then we try to talk about who has been in close contact with that group. So that's sort of the testing and the surveillance that we're doing, and the residential community is part of that. If it is that a student tests positive or is identified as a close contact per the CDC guidelines, so usually means being within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more of somebody that has tested positive. So both positive cases and people that are considered high risk or close contacts, those are individuals that we would receive notification from Student Health Services that they should be isolating. And so that's sort of how we get to the point of somebody needing to go into isolation. All of the testing is done by medical professionals. Student Health Services lets housing know who needs to go into isolation, when they need to go into isolation, and for how long they need to go into isolation, when they're going to be released, and if there's any additional testing. So that's sort of the big testing protocol as to how we land at the direction that we may be putting someone in isolation. So hopefully that's not too much, but I just want to be able to share with folks some of the detail, because it seems like that is something that people are looking for.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's very thorough. And so now, when we do get to that point after the testing, can you tell us more about the process that happens if a student is informed that they do need to isolate? How are they informed, and then what happens after that?
Sure. The notification as to whether a student needs to isolate comes from staff at the Student Health Services department. So medical professionals, nurse or a doctor would reach out to the student to either indicate that they have tested positive or that they have been identified as a close contact of somebody that has tested positive. So that initial contact to the student goes directly from the medical professional. And then they are told that somebody from the COVID care team would then reach out to provide the details as to the isolation protocol and what the next steps are. In that initial contact, the student is told to basically limit their contact with anybody, but prepare for moving into isolation for a 2-week period. During that conversation, the students may be asked if they are choosing to isolate on campus. These are for residential students. That's what I can speak to, is the residential student experience. If it is that they are going to isolate on campus, or if it is that they're going to isolate off campus. Off campus, the conversation would be had is whether it is safe for them to do so, whether it's safe for them to go home, depending on where it is, travel restrictions that may be in place, who may be in the household that they are returning to, et cetera. And so that's something that is discussed between the medical professional and the student, and potentially the family, because if it is that there's a minor that is identified as having to isolate, then Student Health Services would reach out to the parents or guardians of that student to involve them in that conversation. But if the assumption is that they're going to be isolating on campus, then what happens is Student Health Services contacts the COVID care team. So there's a designated person that would be basically that person's case manager. And then that COVID care team member would then reach out to the student, tell them the logistics of what it is that they may need to bring or think about bringing, including there's a whole packing list, but things about if it is that they have their academic needs, so laptops, books, notebooks, anything, headphones, anything that they may need for their continued academic support. If they've prepared a COVID care kit, so sometimes that usually includes, cold medication, Advil, things that they may want to have, tissues, cough syrup, those kinds of things. Then they would bring their pillow, their blanket, clothes for the 2-week period, and things that would just make them comfortable in that space. If they have favorite snacks or that kind of thing, they would bring that with them as well. So this is a lot for a student to take in all at the same time, right? They've just gotten a call that said you have tested positive or you're a close contact, and that in itself can be jarring, to say the least. And so what we also do is we provide all of this information in writing to the student as well. So we send them an email. In the email, it includes who their COVID care contact person is, what their new assignment is, how it is that they can move to that space. We make carts available for students so that they can just go to their room, have one cart full, and then go straight to their isolation. How they get their keys, we make sure that they have access to the new building, and we kind of go down that path. And so there's lots of other stuff that's included in the initial communication, but there's a COVID care team contact, there's a dining contact, student health services is a contact for them as well, and then there's a contact number for non-residential emergencies that students can call while they're in isolation.
Got it. Thank you for that info, Ana. And we're seeing a lot of great questions that are coming in from the audience. Thank you so much for your participation. We are going to get through some initial planned questions that we have for Ana, and then we'll jump into all of these great questions. So thank you for that. So Ana, my next question for you is, what is the typical isolation time frame and the testing that happens within that time frame when someone is in the isolation space?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So again, I need to disclose that I'm not the medical expert, but I've been working very closely with public health professionals as well as our student health professionals for the last 5 months. And so I feel like I can reiterate some of the things that they have shared. But I will say that we are fortunate that we have scheduled a separate session directly with Dr. Joe Puccio from our student health services that will be on a Housing Live format next week that can really dive deep into a lot of the medical questions. But let me give it a shot at least. As students are either identified as being part of a positive pool, identified as having the tested positive, those would be the results of a PCR test. And so those individuals would get their results, and they do an initial test, and then they await the PCR test results. But if they test positive, then they're sent to isolation. If it is that they are identified as a close contact, they may be sent to isolation without an initial test, and then within a 5-day window, people that are close contacts may be tested, because some of that has to do with the incubation period, et cetera. Again, I'm not a medical professional, but that's just been the pattern. And then typically what the window that we've been looking at, if somebody tests positive following CDC guidelines, the window is typically about 10 days. If it is that they have not tested positive, but they're a close contact, CDC guidelines are 14 days. And so that's what we follow. But it's not automatic. Housing and Residential Education waits for notification from student health services as to when it is a student is cleared to leave isolation. And so that's our trigger. So we're not counting days. We're preparing people for the longest time period that we have seen in the recommendations, which is 14 days. But some students are able to leave earlier depending on when their exposure is and when their contacts are. So it's all based on the CDC guidelines, and it's informed by the student health services. And that release is also assuming that they're not symptomatic. What we do encourage students to do is to make sure that if they develop symptoms, either before or while they're in isolation, that they make a telehealth appointment with student health services, because we want to make sure that students feel as though they are connected and have a direct line into student health services to take care of any medical questions that they may have. And so, again, Student Health Services is probably the best to respond, but based on my experience, those are some of the broader parameters that have been shared with us.
Great, thank you, Anna. And we're getting some questions about this too, and this is a pre-planned question that I had prepared. What is the cleaning and sanitation protocol for isolation spaces before and after use of a resident?
Sure. So the isolation spaces that we have are designated areas, and part of the preparation before anybody arrives in the space is that we put a starter kit, which I'll talk a little bit about. That's a dining the dining groceries that we put in the meal. I'm sorry, in the space. We make sure that the refrigerator is operational. So it's a refrigerator, microwave, and freezer combo unit that's in each of the bedrooms. We make sure that there are 2 sets of disposable linens that are available so that students don't have to strip their beds when they're going into isolation. And we make sure that the keys are ready, either in a lockbox or we place them in the room. So, and the students would be instructed as to where it is that they can find their keys. We use the space after we have a student leave isolation, and we don't know whether the students are positive or close contacts that are in isolation. We assume everybody is a presumed positive because that allows us to take the most amount of care for the students as well as for the staff that are servicing the buildings. And so when a student leaves, they drop their keys off in a designated drop box that's in the building, so no contact with staff. We wait 48 hours, and then we send the facility staff into the room. They have a disinfecting protocol where they fog the area, and again, that is based on environmental health and safety guidelines. And then after they do that protocol, then they come in and clean the room like you would a regular turn in that room. Along the way, we're asking students to remove the trash that may accumulate because of food deliveries, et cetera. And we do trash pickups on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. But that's the process. Once the cleaning is done, then we go back in and we set it up with the starter kit, the dining starter kit bag, the fresh linens, the fresh frozen meal that's placed in the garage, as well the freezer, and then set the keys, and then we notify the COVID care team that room is ready for the next resident.
All right, thank you. And we've talked about this a little bit. We've talked about the support that students do receive in isolation in regards to the food and the care team members, but can we go into that a little bit more about what specifically the care team members support students with, and also the food that's available through dining?
Sure. So as I had indicated earlier, the first contact is really very focused on logistics and how it is that the student can transition from their residence hall environment into the isolation location. And that's followed up with an email. So the email, again, has a lot of the logistics, and it also includes the contact information for the COVID care team member. So we have several staff that are volunteers that provide this support in addition to their regular jobs. And so those individuals reach out to the student. They reach out initially within the first 24 hours, just sort of after they've gotten settled into their space, just checking on them, seeing how they're doing. The subsequent contact really is based on the students' feedback to us. So we can reach out to them every day. We can reach out to them multiple times a day. The biggest thing is we need to get students to answer their phones when we call them. But we're happy to be there at whatever frequency it is that the students are looking for. Some students just want to kind of do their thing once they sort of get into their routine and they don't feel like they need a daily check-in. and that's fine. We really are dependent on the student to give us some feedback as to what that looks like. We make sure somebody has contacted the student on a daily basis, whether that's a telehealth appointment, whether that's a COVID care team member, whether that's somebody from dining that's been in contact with them. So we want to make sure that the students don't feel isolated, and we know that they're doing okay because we can monitor whether or not they're picking up their meals on a regular basis. But we have the numbers that are provided, and so and those staff members are available anytime to try to support them. So I'm not going to share those numbers with folks on this call because we want to really allow those support numbers to be focused to supporting the students. And so if it is that there are issues that families may have that have questions, et cetera, I know that Parent and Family Programs has an intake form and they've been regularly communicating with us. And we also can navigate any family questions through either our housing at usf.edu number or calling the housing number to try to get some information, general information that's available for the parents if that's something that is needed. So, but part of the email, there's and I'll share with you, there's a student isolation. So if a parent or a family has questions and said, my student was put into isolation, doesn't know what to do, I would recommend that they encourage them to look at their USF email address and check out all of the information that was in that original email. We also have information that's posted throughout the suites and the rooms where students are that include the dining contact number, the COVID care contact number, trash frequency, how to check out of a room, and a lot of things like that.
Great, thank you.
Does that answer the question?
And I know,
okay.
Yes, it does. And in addition to that support, I know that we've been talking and hearing about the additional personalized support that students receive with their certain circumstances and that sort of thing. You're on campus every day and you've been working very closely with the team that provides this amazing support to students. So can you provide some examples of that personalized support that you've seen happen in the halls?
Sure. I mean, I'm just amazed at the team that has really rallied together to try to support our students and try to navigate, something that none of us had ever thought was going to be part of our housing career, the dean. We're working very closely again with the dean of students and student health services and public health to try to support our students. But I'd love to share with you a couple of anecdotes. So checked in with a student and just, tried to see if they had any questions, et cetera, if they needed anything. She said, well, I don't need anything right now, but I had a headache yesterday and I'm concerned I'm going to get a headache tomorrow. And I'm like, well, what would help? And, well, maybe if I could get some Advil or something like that. Okay, I can do that. So, luckily we have a Publix that's on campus. I ran over to Publix, got some Advil and dropped it off in front of her door, knocked on her door. And, it was as simple as that. We had a student that had some chills. I don't know whether she had a fever or she just wasn't feeling well. And she had her own blankets and linens, but it was just she needed something else. And so I'm like, well, we can bring an extra blanket. So we delivered an extra blanket over to the student. We had students that have special dietary needs, and so trying to navigate, somebody that is one of our athletes that is on a lean protein diet and eats several times a day. And so trying to navigate how is it that we can safely go through and support that student in their needs. We had it broke my heart, but we have a student whose birthday it was while they were in isolation, and so making sure that they were able to get a package that a family member had sent to them. And so, we would love to be able to, throw the student a birthday party, but it just wasn't possible. But we want to make sure that students know that there is support that's available. From our dining partners, because I know that dining is an ongoing question because, the The reason that we have dining halls that have so much variety is because we recognize that not all students eat the same, and they don't have the same preferences. Some have more dietary restrictions, some just have different preferences. And so, we have accommodated students that, can you bring an extra bagel for me every morning? Yeah, we can do that. A student that actually called and said, I really eat pizza and French fries. That's what would be my comfort food. And so we can do that. We had a student, and it's hard to do this on large scale, but we're able to do it right now, is, if I could just get a smoothie every once in a while, that would really be helpful for me. And it made that student's day. And so, the more information that we have as to what it is that would work for a student, and the more time that we have to prepare for that, the easier it is for us to be able to accommodate. We've worked with dining services, and they are able to add anything to a student's meal delivery from our pod market. So anything that is available in a pod market, the students can request. We can just add it on to the delivery that the students receive, and just do a dining dollar or a bull buck deduction for whatever that meal is, soda or whatever it is that they're looking for from the pod market. So there are a lot of accommodations that we've been making. It's tough with students arriving sporadically throughout the day, right? We have people moving in and people moving out, I would say from 9 a.m. to 9 or 10 p.m. And that's just the nature of how we find out about students that need to go into isolation. And so they may have missed the daily meal delivery service if they arrive at 9 o'clock at night. But the students that are in the spaces, there's a frozen dinner that's in all of the freezers, and they have the starter kits. I have some of the food behind me that are part of some of those starter kits. And so those are some of the things that we've done to accommodate. And we're doing our best, but we know that one size doesn't fit all. But we need to start somewhere. And so we're focused on safety, we're focused on nutrition, and we're focused on consistency. And then we're also focused on cost, right? So we didn't want to add a $50 a day bill to students that are going into isolation. And so we wanted to work within the parameters of the meal plans that we have that are available to us.
Got it. Thank you, Ana, for that. And we're still getting lots of great questions. So thank you, everyone, again. And thank you for your patience as we get through these pre-planned questions. I just have one last pre-planned question for you, Ana, and then we'll jump into the questions from the audience. What is your advice for students and families to manage this experience? Preparing for it, going through it, what would be your advice?
So as the parent of a college age, two college age students, I can see it from both for the student's perspective as well as the parent's perspective. And so this is my advice as an administrator, as a parent, and having heard some feedback. So a couple of things. One is from a preparation standpoint. I think it's great for students and families to have conversations about, this may happen, right? We're going to do everything that we can to mitigate the risk, right? Encourage people to make sure that they're wearing masks, that they're staying 6 feet social distant, that they're washing their hands. They're doing everything that they can in their control to avoid this becoming their circumstance, so that I try to end every day by being able to say, if for some reason I was diagnosed as being positive, I wouldn't have to say to anybody that I work with or that I'm around on a daily basis that you were one of my close contacts, because I'm not within 6 feet for 15 minutes with anybody on the campus. Now, my family, I'd have to navigate that with them because we share a household, but just trying to look at best practices. I think the other thing is to be prepared, almost have a COVID isolation go packet, whether that is that it's favorite snacks that you may have, whether it is, extra, sweatpants or T-shirts that you want to bring. Make sure you stay up with your laundry so that you're able to just gather things together and move very quickly, because there isn't a lot of time. I think that from the parent-student dynamic, trying to understand what the expectations you each have of each other as you have transitioned into the college experience, and how that communication may need to shift if it is that you get news that you're going into isolation, because the transition can be anxiety provoking, can be sort of a balance of wanting to give students a lot of independence, but sort of tearing at your heartstrings that you really want to be able to take care of the student there. And so, trying to set, all right, if you go into isolation, I need a text every day to let me know what's going on, or share with me the information that you're getting. Encourage the student. I'm assuming most of the people that are probably listening today are more of our families. If you could encourage the student to use the contact information that is provided to them and advocate for themselves. So if they need something, have them ask for that so that we can try to support them in that way. I've told you a lot of the systems that are in place and the way things should be working. If what your experience is that it's not working that way, help us help you. So reach out to parent and family programs through their intake form. Email housing@usf.edu. Let us, the people that are available and are ready to help to support the students, be the first line of contact, because that's the best way for us to get the information so that we can see if something is broken in our system or if there are adjustments that need to be made so that we can better support students that are going through this difficult time.
Great advice. Thank you for that, Anna. So
Sure.
we are going to jump into these questions from the audience. The first couple of questions are from the reports that came yesterday. A couple of parents are asking if we can respond to the reports from USF parents whose students were maybe not getting the food that they were asking for, or not given food while in quarantine, and not given assistance when they called the contact numbers, or the pictures of trash in rooms not cleaned between student occupants. So I know that there were some reports that came through on social media specifically about that. So do you want to provide any clarification on those scenarios?
Sure. I explained a little bit about what the dining plans are, but let me dive into that a little bit deeper. So as students go into their room, there is a bag of groceries, which basically provides some staple items, some snacks, some beverages, and then there's a frozen meal for each student that is available in their room. And so the idea behind the starter kit is really to be able to accommodate students who are arriving after the meal delivery period. And so it surprised me to hear that. I didn't have the name of the student, and so I'd like to follow up and try to figure out what happened with regard to that. But that's certainly not the experience that students should have. It is accurate that if a student came in at 9 o'clock at night, then the next meal delivery period would be at between 5 and 6 or 4 and 6 p.m. The following day. And so in that meal delivery, there would be a hot meal as well as the lunch items for the next day. And the isolation menu is available on the dining services website. So it's surprising to me if that was the experience, that somebody felt like there was no food that was available and there was nobody that responded to that, because again, there are 4 or 5 different numbers, email addresses, et cetera, that we would have been able to contact. So, I'm happy to try to investigate that particular case to understand what happened there, but certainly that is not our standard. And if that's the case, call me. So my name's Ana Hernandez. You can call me if you think that your students don't have any food for 20 hours. I'm hoping that you would call me in the morning to let me know what was going on, and we would try to track that down. You had also mentioned trash in the room. So I talked about the isolation protocol as to how it is that we turn the rooms. I don't know, again, the specific circumstances with regard to that case, and I'm happy to try to investigate that further if somebody can give me some specifics so that we can better understand if something fell down in our process. I do know, and again, I don't know whether this is the circumstance, we have been having some difficulty with students going to the wrong rooms. So they may be in the wrong building, or they were on the wrong floor, or they found a door locked that they were expecting to be open, or a door that was open that should have been locked, etc. And so I don't know whether it was that somebody walked into a room that was not their designated room, or what that happened. But I'm happy to try to investigate what happened, because that's certainly not our expectation.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Anna. And another way to get in contact is if there is a situation like that, their student believes that their expectations are not being met based on the information that's provided, be sure to email housing@usf.edu as well, so that we can forward it to the appropriate person to be making the moves on that need to happen. So thank you for that information, Anna.
I just wanted to add one of the things that because I did see that there was some back and forth that, dining said call housing, housing said call dining. Sometimes we get that from student health services and the like of, somebody would call student health services and say that they had a housing isolation question, then it gets transferred over to housing, and we're trying to answer the question, and then they're asking how long they need to be in isolation, which is really more of a medical question. And so some of it is just trying to understand what the questions are that are trying to be answered, so that we can try to gather the information, because all the information is not held by the same person, but you shouldn't have to navigate that, right? That's why we have the COVID care team members. And so that's why I want to make sure that we're directing students back to the email in case they don't know what the COVID care team number is, et cetera, so that they may have forgotten what that is. But we have a COVID care team member, we have a duty number, there's a counseling center number, and there's a dining number, all of which that are available to the student. And so the housing@usf.edu or the parent and family programs, those are sort of the backups. You can call me, I'm a backup too, but certainly the experience that we expect is as I'm describing, and if it's not happening that way, let's have a conversation about that.
Great. And so we're getting some questions, some repeat questions on the similar topic, since we're talking about meals, or we just were.
Sure.
Some family members are asking, why are students not delivered 3 meals? Why is breakfast not included if it is included? So can you explain the process behind the meals being delivered in that window, and if someone wants breakfast, what the process would be to add that on?
Absolutely. So again, we haven't done this before, and so we were trying to balance safety, consistency, nutrition, as well as cost. And so the plan that we have developed is we have this starter kit, which provides some of the basics in the room, and then the meal delivery is once a day. And what we do is the meal delivery is a hot meal for dinner, and then the lunch meal for the following day. Part of that is because we need to reduce the staff contact in the building. So how many times a staff member needs to go into a building that is designated as an isolation location. The reason that it is 2 meals is because typically those are the meals that students are utilizing. We have fewer students that come to the dining hall for breakfast type of items, and so for students that may be on the NE15 plan, that way they would have 14 meals a day. There wouldn't be any added expenses to it, and it was sort of setting that baseline. We also didn't want to have food waste, and so that's part of that dynamic that exists as well. But if it is that a student wants breakfast items, mostly what we're able to deliver at this point is pastries, muffins, fruit, that kind of thing, additional cereal, oatmeal, and the like. So any student that wants to have that added to their meal delivery, they just need to call the number, and we can make those arrangements. There's no extra charge for any of that. So the standard is the 2 meals, but as I explained, we have added on additional items to students as they're requesting them, and so we want students to let us know what it is that they're requesting, and we can tell them what it is we can do and what it is that we're not able to do. So I would encourage students to let us know what it is that they need. Again, the more time that they give us, the easier it is for us to fulfill that. We typically are doing the meal deliveries again between that 4 and 6 window, and so if we get a request at 3:30, it's a little more difficult to get it into that meal cycle. But we can try to get it into the next meal cycle, or if you say, like the woman that requested, if you can just give me 2 bagels, or if you can just, throw in 4 bananas a day, we can certainly go ahead and try to accommodate that.
Great. And so we're seeing some comments concerned about if a student enters isolation later at night, and they won't be receiving that delivery until between 4 and 6 the next day. The concern of that wait period. We just talked about the starter kit that is in the room. There's also a frozen meal. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In their room as well. So that's their option at that point, is to have those backups that are prepared for them as they come in, the different snacks and the food that is available in their mini fridge or their mini freezer.
That is correct.
All right.
I mean, if we have a dire situation, then let us know. We'll try to figure out what we can do, but that's sort of the standard protocol that we have.
Great. And so the next couple of questions that I wanted to touch on, since we're on this topic of food, is some questions regarding students that have special dietary restrictions, food allergies, or ones that, a great point is ones that are symptomatic and might want a much blander menu, one that can't handle a lot of flavor or what have you. So is that something, some questions we're getting, is that something that they can establish with dining before a just in case scenario? They're not, they have not been exposed, they have not been told to go into isolation, but is there some sort of way to get ahead of that in case it were to be a situation where they needed to go into isolation? Can they have that contact with dining to talk about it before it gets to that point? Also, if it is at that point and they have not had that contact with dining, how do they go about explaining their special dietary needs or restrictions as they enter isolation?
So I haven't had a conversation with dining services about sort of the pre-planning. So I like where that person is thinking, though, trying to just anticipate the needs as far in advance as possible. And so I'll check with them to see how they may be able to manage that, because I wouldn't want somebody to go through the process of providing that information and then there not be a system on the back end to be able to track that information. And so let me check to see what that looks like, and then we'll probably post to the family's Facebook page or our Facebook page what the direction from dining would be in that circumstance, because I don't want to misspeak with regard to that. I do know that we have registered dietitians and the dining services team that are available if it is that parents, families, students want to call the regular dining number or email dining to say, this is what I'm trying to do. And what does that look like? What would you be able to do in isolation for me? And have those one-on-one conversations. I think that they would be open to trying to navigate that with students, because the end goal is everybody wants people to be comfortable, to be successful, and to be nourished in their isolation experience. And so the more that we can get ahead of that, the better. But let me talk to dining and figure out what the best way to facilitate that is. But if there's somebody specifically that would like to be involved in that, and we can understand who their student is, and we can do some outreach to the student, I'm sure that we'd be happy to do that.
All right, thank you. And a great question from Christine. Is there a frozen meal for vegetarians in that mini fridge freezer combo for someone that's coming in that needs to have a vegetarian option?
We have some vegetarian options that are available. We have some gluten-free options that are available. I can't guarantee right now that the room that they are assigned to has pre-packaged or pre-planned that's where the vegetarian meal is. But that certainly is something that we would be able to accommodate, and that could be a drop-off that we could make happen.
And the same goes for questions that are with students that have the gluten-free diet. So the same answer applies to them as well. So
yes, so Julia, so we've designated some rooms as gluten-free rooms. So we tried to put a starter kit in there that's gluten-free. We tried to put a frozen meal that's gluten-free. It's just because we're getting cases from 9 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. It's just that I can't guarantee that, but that is the goal, is that we would have vegetarian, vegan, and gluten-free rooms that are designated, that we would be able to put people in those spaces that would accommodate those dietary needs. So, we certainly want to support students that have, we have students that have lactose intolerance, that have peanut allergies, that have a variety of different dietary needs and/or restrictions. And we want people to be safe and we want people to be healthy. And so, we're learning as we go. And so we want to get that feedback so that we can try to accommodate them the best way we can.
Got it. Thank you. And a specific question from Elaine: do the students receive bottled water in isolation, or do they need to bring their own? If they do receive bottled water, how much? I see behind you there a couple of bottled water bottles there. So.
Yeah. So what I have behind me are some of the various things that we have in the isolation kits, and bottled water is part of that starter kit, and they also get the bottled water as part of their meal deliveries. But again, that can be something that, if there's additional water that people would like included in their deliveries, we can absolutely take care of that. So we also have some shelf-stable milk that we do. We have some soy milk that is available for those who have that preference or those restrictions. We have Powerade that's available for them. And juices. So there's a variety of different beverages that are available. And again, we're trying to set the base, and then we can accommodate as the needs are there. But yes, absolutely, water is part of the delivery process as well as the starter kits.
Got it. And a couple of specific questions about cost here. Mary's asking if there's a cost for the starter kit, and then Cindy's asking if there's a cost for isolation in general.
So the starter kit is a $20 cost, a one-time $20 cost for the students and for the content of that. And then the meal plans would be, so if a student is on a meal plan, then it would just reduce their swipes for that week. If it is that they had additional dining dollars because they wanted to have pod market specific things from the pod market, then that would be a deduction for them as well. If a student is not on a meal plan, then there is a cost for the students. I'm not sure what that specific cost is, but the students who are in that circumstance, we have very few students that are going into isolation that are not part of some meal plan, but that information is provided to the student. And so I can try to get the detail on that. I'm sorry, I don't remember that one off the top of my head.
All right, and
I'm
Brenda's
sorry,
asking,
but there's no. I'm sorry. Can I just want to say,
absolutely.
But there's no additional charge to be in isolation. So students continue to have their residence hall rent semesterly charges, but there isn't any per night charge from a rental standpoint that's on top of that.
Got it. Good to know. Thank you. And Brenda and Gina are both asking the same question. What can you expect in the starter kit? Can you explain what comes with that?
Sure. So our regular starter kit has the frozen meal part of it, the water, the um, different beverages, juices. There are snacks, some Doritos, some comfort food, junk food for the students. There is cereal. There's usually oatmeal, granola bars. Macaroni and cheese that they can make in a microwave, soup that they can make in a microwave. For some of the allergen sensitive spaces, let me see. So like there's a vegan mac and cheese that we put in. This is like a udon soup and noodle bowl. Trying to think, Cheerios I see. There's like chicken and rice soup, that people may have. Let's see. There's some trail mix that they have. So there's quite a variety. We try to sort of get the sweet, get the salty, get the beverages, get some things that are common to a college age student diet, as well as having some comfort food. Sometimes when you're sick, you feel like some chicken soup. So those are just some samples of what's in a starter kit.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having all of that out there too to show some examples.
Sure.
That's helpful. So some questions are coming in after we went through the price for the starter kit. So some questions about why they would be charged for the starter kit. I'm assuming because of the wide variety and being able to provide as much options as possible to students. But do you want to go over why that $20 charge would come from automatically receiving that starter kit?
Right. So we want to make sure that all students have food when they're in their room, and it's similar to being able to go to the pod market, and so trying to pull some of those items that would be available and convenience items for the students, and so we try to keep that cost as low as we could while still providing that basic meal substance for them. So and that's basically the equivalent of what the charges are for both the frozen meal as well as the items that are in the starter kit.
All right, thank you. And so I'm going to switch gears. I tried to get through a lot of the meal starter kit focused questions here. If more come in, we'll jump back into it. But I'm going to switch over to a popular question that we're getting is about deliveries. So outside of the dining deliveries, people are asking if deliveries are an option for either another dining service like Grubhub or something like that to get something external from campus dining, and then also mail service if families wanted to send their student a package. Can you talk about the protocol that's in place and some changes that may be happening?
Sure. To be honest with you, we were starting slow because we wanted to limit the number of staff members that were in the building, and try to really just go on critical items so that we could make sure that we could do that well. And so the first few weeks that we had isolation, we didn't allow any package deliveries. And so part of that was just the capacity of staff to be able to manage that, because we also were trying to restrict access into the residence hall. And once students are going into their isolation room, they're not permitted to leave their isolation room. And so having somebody from a food delivery service at the front door of the building was not conducive, because the student wouldn't be able to go down to the front door to get whatever that delivery was without risking further exposure in the building. And so food delivery is not something that we're able to support. But what we did starting this week, starting on Monday, we notified all of the students that were in isolation that we would be able to begin delivering packages that we received through our mail services. So again, part of what we're trying to do to be sustainable in supporting students is to try to use systems that are already in place. And so students are able to order things online. They receive a message when it arrives at their regular mail address that a package has been delivered. They can then reach out to, I have my assistant director of housing services in charge of this coordination, so Megan Hooper. They can reach out to Megan Hooper to let her know that they're authorizing somebody from housing services to retrieve their mail and then deliver it into the isolation. And so students have the ability to order items that they would get delivered through the mail. We also know that there may be some local families that want to deliver packages rather than provide them through the mail. So we have restrictions that we're not able to deliver perishable items, prepared food, et cetera, for food handling reasons. But if it is that there's a package that a student is receiving that is being dropped off instead of going through FedEx or UPS or the Postal Service, we can still accept those at the mail center. And then the student would just email Megan again to let her know that there was a package that I'm expecting and that we're authorized to, again, take it out of the mail delivery system and bring it over to isolation. And so we started those mail deliveries. We did a couple last week, but more so have picked it up on Monday, Tuesday, and today. And so that would be something that would be available. But we're still not able to safely support a Grubhub or a Domino's or some other commercial food delivery service. And we're also being very specific that the packages that are being delivered have to be sealed packages. So because we want to make sure that as staff are retrieving them, they are delivering them in whole. They put them outside the student's door, knock on the door, student retrieves them without any contact. So that is something that we implemented this week. We implemented it as a pilot program. I checked with Megan just to see how are things going, are people sort of following the rules and the protocol, and is it a volume that we can still handle? And she said her team's ready to support it, and so we'll continue on with that process.
Great, and thank you for those details. And for a student that has prescriptions at the USF pharmacy, is that process the same with it being delivered to the mail center and then Megan's team then bringing it to the student? In isolation, do you have details on prescriptions specifically?
So we don't have a partnership right now with like the campus pharmacy to do deliveries. I'm not sure if they do deliveries, so I can try to figure out if that is something that they would do. I think that probably if there's a medical need, that would be expressed through the telehealth appointment that they would make with student health services. Student health services and/or the student directly could reach out to the COVID care team member, and then we can figure out how it is that we might be able to do that delivery. But I think that's more of a unique situation, and because it would involve medication, I just want to be careful and check with both student health services, the pharmacy, as well as the COVID care team as to how we would want to navigate that. But certainly, I want people to hear that we want students to be able to get their medication. We actually recommend, and we recommended in our move-in packet, that students bring, a 30 or 90-day supply of any regular medication that they're on, so that they're ready to go into isolation, and that medication shortages don't become an issue. So, but we're happy to work with people on whatever those specific needs they may have.
All right, thank you. That answers a couple more questions that came in about prescriptions directly. So going back to the question of deliveries, a family member is asking if they can send home-baked cookies. I am assuming that this goes under the food handling scenario that we just talked about, and that would be a no if my understanding is correct. But if you want to give your thoughts on that.
All right. So this is
You
what
can answer.
this is what I need to say. um, Packages must be sealed. We are not opening packages. I am saying that packages should not contain perishable items because I need to make sure that our staff are not responsible for delivering perishable items.
Got it.
That's
All
how I
right.
can respond to that.
Thank you for that answer. Okay, so I'm going to move from deliveries now. We covered that, and if any more come in, I'm happy to jump back into that as well. And I'd like to move on to the care team. We are getting, or we have received a lot of questions about the care team, what they're responsible for, and what the expectation is, because there seems to be some concern about the contact level that the care team has had with the student. So if you don't mind going over again what that expectation is, and if that expectation is not being met, what the steps are for the student to take.
Sure, sure. So initial contact for the COVID care team member would be to share with the student the logistics of their transition from their residence hall room into the isolation location. They also are responsible for sending an email that includes the isolation guidance protocol, the contact information, the room assignment, etc. So basically, if a student knows which room they need to go to, they should have received the email that has this packet and this information. Then the COVID care team members should be reaching out to the student within 24 hours of their transition into the isolation location to touch base with them. Then there's a discussion between the student and the COVID care team member as to what does outreach look like, and how often do they want that to be? Do they want it to be via phone call or text or email? What does that look like for them? So they sort of negotiate that because every student is different. I will share with you and families that one of the biggest things that we're having with regard to communication with the students, and I know this from my college age students as well. I think that for my students, I think that I'm the only person that actually calls them on their cell phone, that their phone rings. Everything else is really through text messages. And so we really need to encourage students that as they're going through this process, to please answer their phones. Please make sure that we have good contact information, because we try to reach out to students and sometimes they don't pick up. And so we try to email, but students don't really utilize email for regular kind of communication. It really is all text or other types of methodologies. And so I think that is the expectation. If it is that the students are feeling as though they're not being supported, my hope is that it's just crossed wires with regard to the COVID care team member thought that the student said one thing with regard to the contact that they wanted, and they actually meant something else, or that their expectations have changed, right? They thought that they were good in the beginning, and then, day 4, they're getting kind of lonely and they really would rather talk to somebody, right? We do Teams meetings, and so Teams is the platform that we use for communication so that we can do, video conferencing and those kinds of things. And so we want to make sure that we're available. We're actually probably going to start to send information via the Teams platform to students as well, just to try to get it to them in the format that is most readily accessible to them. But certainly if a parent or a family member or a student feels as though they are not being supported the way that they need support in isolation, I would encourage them to reach out to the avenues that we've talked about for families, going through the family intake page, and for students or using housing@usf.edu, and we'll try to close that gap the best we can. So we're also trying to explore if there is a way that we can almost form a virtual community anonymously, right? Because it involves medical diagnosis, right? So we don't want to to share who's in isolation if they don't want that, but just to kind of say, okay, so meals have been delivered, or we can expect this, or if anybody wants to just get on a call and chat, we want that to remain part of their outreach, as well as all of the virtual things that they still have contact with. Bulls in the cloud, their RA that's in their building, their RLC that's in their building. None of that gets shut off while students are in isolation. So there should be lots of ways that students can reach out, but certainly we don't want anybody to feel as though they're isolated, meaning that they are alone and disconnected. We just need them to be isolated and physically distant from other individuals.
Great point. Thank you, Anna. So for anybody that's just now joining, we did talk about how there were all those resources with phone numbers and different people from different departments that were there to virtually support the student that is going into isolation. Christine's asking if there's anything physically in the room with these resources, for example, numbers to call, what to expect. We talked about the email that they get that will be in their inbox, their USF email, but anything physical in that room.
There are several items that are posted in each of the rooms. Some of the things are talks about. So with each of the starter kit is the phone number for dining services, because we know that that's one of the primary points of contact. It talks about the delivery. It talks about how they can see the isolation menu. There's a QR code for them. There's a QR code for them to provide feedback. So complete a survey just so that we can keep that ongoing communication. There is information that talks about their COVID, not their direct COVID care team member, but that there is a COVID care team contact number, and how to reach somebody if they have questions or they need to have some of the contact. The emergency protocols, so basically notifying students that they're in isolation, they're not to leave their room unless they're directed to do so by a medical professional, emergency personnel, or hopefully this won't happen, but if it is that there's an alarm and there's a fire alarm that goes in the building, how it is that they're supposed to put their masks on, stay physically distant, and they certainly can evacuate if an alarm goes off. But that there are consequences if it is that they leave their isolation location without permission. And so we want to make sure that people understand that this is serious, and we're trying to do our best to keep the staff safe, keep the students supported, as well as protecting the community. There's also information about the trash pickups, so that and there are trash bags that are located in the rooms, and so what that protocol is about putting the trash in, making sure that it's outside their immediate suite door by 8 a.m. on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We pick it up and go there. If there's a work order, so if there's any issue with their room, the standard work order process that we have is still in place, and the COVID care team member can support them in that regard. I'm trying to picture there are probably 6 or 7 things that are posted in the room. Most of it is duplicative of the things that are sent to them via email. So, but those are some of the specific things that I recall that are in the room.
And as far as dining, we did talk about the specific dietary restrictions that someone may have, or if they have any questions. Is there, Jennifer's asking, which contact is the student to call if they want to request more of something in their meal delivery, or if there's a dining number on the contact sheet or a description of who to call if there's any specific requests or needs, or if they don't like something in their starter kit, anything dining related, do they have a number for that?
Yes, so that is included in the information that is included both in the packet, so in the isolation resource guide that they're sent in the email, as well as posted in the room. And so there is a food service liaison, and so they request, because it's somebody that's on call that is there, if it can wait and they can call between the hours of 9 and 7, 9 a.m. and 7 p.m., that would be great, because then there are additional resources that are available. But, somebody's answering the call all the time. And if it is that there's an urgent food-related issue that can't wait until 9 o'clock the next morning, then we can reach out to the COVID care team member, and we can try to figure out how it is that we might be able to support the student. But all of that is the same number, whether it is that somebody has allergies, has food preferences, wants something delivered from the C-store, or wants more of something or less of something else. All of those things, we'll try to best accommodate as we can.
Great, thank you. And what are the penalties for violating isolation rules? You talked about the consequences a little bit, we hinted at that, but what are the specific penalties? A question from a viewer.
Yeah, so the breaking isolation protocol is probably one of the most serious things that you can do on our campus nowadays, and probably is one of those things that is something that probably couldn't be more clear as to what the expectation is, that they're going into isolation and they're not to leave the room, and they need to adhere to all of the other student housing and campus protocols. So if it is that there is a student that violates those protocols, or a housing or campus rule, then they are referred to student conduct and ethical responsibility, which is the office that handles violations. So a report is written, and then the student conduct office decides what the next best step is. It could go down the path of warning, of we want to make sure that you understood that this is what's going on. You can't do that. Reasons why. There may be some educational sanctions that are offered to students. Mostly that's more standard in campus violations. For isolation protocol, students can be provisionally suspended and removed from isolation and removed from campus, depending on what the violation is. So, that can be, so a provisional suspension involves either there's immediate action if there's an ongoing threat to the community, or students may be permitted to stay in isolation until their hearing, which would be within a 3 to 5 day window. So the conduct letter would notify them as to what the specifics are with regard to that. But we really need students to take this seriously, and we really need students to help us help them be successful. So we don't want people feeling as though they need to break the isolation protocol because they need to get food or whatever that may be, because that's just not the way to go. And so we want to help students be successful and finish their isolation safely.
Got it. And to that, a question from a viewer is, if a student needs emergency medical care after hours, they can leave isolation to go to urgent care or the ER. What would be the process with that?
They would call 911.
Yep.
And our university police would respond with medical professionals if it is that there was an ambulance necessary, et cetera. So if anybody is ever experiencing a medical emergency, they should call 911, and the university police are prepared to respond.
And I'm going to switch gears over to logistics of the spaces for isolation and the locations. But first, a couple of questions have come in about laundry. If students should be prepared for 14 days of clothes with no access to laundry, and if that's the case, can they have a space in a closet to wash their clothes in the sink if necessary, and then hang up their clothes?
Yes. So yes and yes. So the isolation protocol doesn't allow for the use of a laundry room, because our laundry rooms are community based, and so it wouldn't be safe for somebody that has been designated as having to go into isolation to be able to use a community laundry room. So that's why we really encourage students to make sure they stay up with their laundry so that they're able to pack enough clothes that they could that could last for the 14 days that they're in that space. We do include in our packing list, if it is that that they feel like they need to do laundry. We actually provide students instructions on how to do laundry in their sink, and we can get them some liquid laundry detergent that they can use if that's necessary. So there's plenty of room in the room to be able to lay things out. There are the closet rack. The closets have wire racks. And so students are able to hang things from those racks if they need to. So, but that's basically where we land. We don't have a way to support students being able to go to do their laundry.
That makes sense. Thank you. So one of the questions that's coming in, and then we'll move on to this category, is, are the isolation spaces single spaces?
So the isolation spaces, the individual bedrooms are single spaces. And so there may be occasions, if it is medically permissible, that students may be sharing a bathroom, but that would only be if it is that's approved by the medical professionals, as it is that they're indicating that the students need to be going into isolation. But every student that goes into isolation will have their own bedroom. They will not have a roommate.
Right. And one of the earlier questions that came in, so I'm scrolling up to go read it, is if roommates are sent to quarantine together due to either an exposure or a positive test, can they room together? This viewer has concerns about the student's mental health while being isolated. So is moving in with your roommate to an isolation space an option?
So we try to accommodate students if it is that it's medically advisable. So if it is that both students were positive, that may be something that we would be able to consider. If one student is just exposed and one student is positive, then we've received feedback that that's not advisable, because we don't want a student that is not positive rooming with a student who is designated as positive. And so that's where we run into some difficulty. And if it is that there's an exposed student, so a high contact, high risk student that has not yet tested positive, they may be waiting for the results of their test. And so even if it is that we have two students that are contacts, neither of them are positive, we really can't put them together because one of them may turn out to be positive. So all of this is, we would love to be able to have roommates together. We know that, this is really a very stressful time for students and environment for students. And so we're working very closely with Student Health Services and asking them those questions. Is there an ability for us to put people at least in the same general area? We wouldn't put them in the same bedroom together, but we may be able to put them in the same living unit together. So, but all of it has to be based on the medical advice. That's what has to drive every decision that we're making.
Right, makes sense. Thank you. And then a viewer is asking for clarification on whether the isolation dorm for potential positives, so exposure, and the quarantine dorm for positive cases are the same building or separate buildings. If they are in the same building, is there some other separation to keep them keep the possibility of exposure from the confirmed positives to the those who have been exposed or are isolating for that reason?
So I'm limited in getting into some of the details with regard to our isolation location because it's part of our emergency response plan. But I will tell you that we try to make all of we do make all of our decisions based on the medical advice, and so we presume everybody is positive and try to go from there. And so if a student is in one room that is positive and a student is in another room, they shouldn't be crossing paths because they're in isolation. And so, again, we're following what the medical professionals and the public health professionals have told us is a safe protocol with regard to that. But certainly reducing exposure of students that have not been in contact with each other before, and then even after they go into isolation. That's one of the reasons why we're very strict with regard to people not leaving their isolation room. And even if a student has a doctor's appointment or for some reason needs to go to student health, we get a call from student health so that we can make sure that the building is cleared of staff. Like, we don't have somebody going out while we're trying to do a food delivery or something like that. So we try to be as careful as we can to limit exposure for other students as well as staff that are servicing the buildings.
Right, thank you. So this question may also, the specifics of this may also fall under the emergency response protocol. So you may not be able to give specifics, but viewers asking how many students are currently in isolation and how many can you accommodate?
So I can answer the first question and sort of the second question. So today we had 66 people that were in isolation. I say that today, in that couching, because that number changes every day, every hour. So we have students that leave isolation, we have students that come into isolation, and so we're trying to make sure that we can accommodate students. I don't have any concern that with the spaces that we have available that we would not be able to accommodate students that have that need. So I'm not able to share with you the specifics with regard to locations and numbers of the isolation spaces, but want to provide some assurance that we feel comfortable and our medical professionals feel comfortable that we'll be able to accommodate students that have that need.
And who is responsible for cleaning the bathroom, whether it be shared or single, while a student is in isolation?
Because we don't have staff that are going into the spaces once they are occupied, it would be the students that would be responsible for cleaning that space. We have provided some cleaning supplies for students who have requested them, and are happy to do so. But that would be the expectation. So far, most of the spaces that we have are single use, so it's only the student. The single student that is using those bathrooms, but that would be the expectation, is that the students, just like during the week, or if a student was in an apartment, they would be responsible for cleaning their own bathrooms.
Great. And Christine's asking if anyone helps the student move their things to the isolation room. They're concerned that they don't have enough time to gather all their things and move in that time period.
So we don't have anybody physically that helps people with their isolation, because, as you probably could understand, is that we need to limit the contact. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to have the students go as quickly as they can to their room and remove whatever it is that they need to bring. One of the things that we've tried to do to facilitate that, and for those who were on campus during the move-in process, we have move-in carts. So they're large gray carts that are available that students are able to use so that they can have more sort of load more items and have a set of wheels, depending on which building that they're coming from and which building that they're going to. So, but we try to work with the COVID care team member, and if there's some sort of extenuating circumstance with regard to when a student can move, and if it is medically permissible, we want to be able to provide them that space. So, for example, we have had a student that found out that they needed to move, and they had a single room, and they had a online class that was starting, within that half hour. And so instead of saying you have to be out in an hour, we allowed that student to stay in their room, have their online class because they weren't risking exposure, and then were able to move into the isolation space a little bit later. But communication is key as to what it is that we need. One of the things that we're trying to do, and why we put a limit, is we want that to be the student's sole focus, is to go get what they need and then get into isolation as quickly as possible in order to reduce any potential exposure.
And this is a question that was answered previously, but I'll answer it again. If a student has
Sure.
to quarantine on campus, do they need to bring their own bedding from their current room? No, we went over that. The bedding is included in their isolation space.
The linens are included. So there's a set of disposable sheets that are included, but as part of the packing list, they should be bringing their pillow as well as a blanket. If for some reason they don't have a blanket or they don't want to bring their pillow, we can make that accommodation. But other than the student that wanted an extra blanket, everybody else has been fine bringing their own belongings. It just makes them feel more comfortable.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification. And
Sure.
then going back to the restroom cleaning really quick before we move on to some more logistic questions. If it's the student's responsibility to clean the bathroom, does USF supply cleaning products, or is it part of the packing list?
It would be part of the packing list if for some reason students don't have that because they don't clean their bathroom in their regular residence hall environment and they may not have that readily accessible to them. Then we're happy to provide those cleaning supplies. They would just need to let us know.
All right, great. So a question that's come from a couple of viewers. Do students have the option to go into the Hillsborough County separate isolation space or something that's similar to that option? I think that a previous question mentioned the Pinellas County as well, that they already have those spaces set up for isolation options. If they choose to do that, is that an option for them?
So I don't know what the answer to that question is, but let me tell you the conversations that I've had about that issue. Is that we have a very close relationship with the Hillsborough County Department of Health through our emergency management office. It is certainly their preference that we accommodate students that we can that live on campus in our on-campus facilities. Or if a student chooses to go off campus, that they go home or they find another location with a friend or family member if it is safe for them to do so. We haven't encountered the need for students to go into the county shelter. But if that need arose, and if somebody wanted us to explore that further, they could reach out to me and I will get them in contact with our emergency management office and we can kind of figure out what that looks like. I think that what we're trying to do is be good partners to our county medical professionals, public health professionals, and if it is that we're able to accommodate students on campus, which we expect that we would be able to do so, then they would prefer to be able to utilize the county spaces for other county residents that may not have the university as an option.
Great, thank
you. But if that's a preference, I can certainly explore that if that's something that somebody would like me to make those connections for them.
Yeah, that question has been asked a couple of times just by two viewers that I see. A big question we're getting, though, in addition to that a lot of duplicate questions, is about coming to quarantine at home. So some questions about family visitation, which I know obviously no visitation is allowed in the isolation spaces, but
right.
For those that are asking about picking up their students, if at some point the student is in the isolation space, let's say for 4 days, and then they decide they want to come home and the family member makes the drive to come pick them up, can they do that? Can they do that at any point? And what is the process for the student? Do they need to start over with their isolation? So if you could go through the moving off campus to isolate option, that would be really helpful for those asking about that.
Sure, and I'm going to break that down into two experiences that we have had on campus. So sometimes students are notified that they need to go into isolation, and they decide right away that it's a better option for them, and they're able to safely do that in their home environment. And so Student Health Services would notify Housing and Residential Education that this student needs to leave the residence hall, but that they have somebody that's coming to pick them up within a certain time frame. They're given instructions on making sure that they remain isolated in their room until somebody physically is on campus to pick them up, and then they immediately go to the car and then they leave campus. So that's an option. That's probably the I'm going to say cleanest option, but the simplest option, because it's based on Student Health Services being involved in that process right at the beginning, and they've assessed that that's an acceptable thing for them to do. What we would do on the housing end is we would then shut off their access to the residential building, and the student would not have access to the residential building until we were notified by Student Health Services that it was appropriate that the student would be able to move back into a community environment. So after their isolation is over, after they've received that clearance. We also have cases where students have moved into the isolation building. It could be because they were originally going to be in isolation awaiting a test result, that they were just a high risk or close contact, and then they get a positive diagnosis, or they've been in isolation. Somebody mentioned earlier, that it wasn't good for their mental health to be isolated, and they would feel more comfortable being with family or in a different support system. If that is the case, then what we would want is for the student to either reach out to their COVID care team member or to make an appointment, telehealth appointment with Student Health Services, so that we could get verification from Student Health Services that would be an appropriate transition for the student to make. We would then designate a time and connect with the student. If it is that they have somebody that is driving up from South Florida, that they would be there in 4 hours, then we know when to expect them. Then the student basically is authorized to leave their isolation location so that they don't get dinged for breaking isolation without being approved. And so that medical authorization would come from Student Health Services for the student to then be able to, once the family member or whoever it is that was coming to pick them up arrived on campus, again, they move directly out of isolation into the car, and then they leave campus. So the possibility is there. That's sort of what the protocol looks like. Communication is going to be key. So it's more difficult if what happens is a parent or a family member shows up on campus and the student just leaves, because we need to know where they are. We need to know why somebody would be leaving isolation. And so just keeping the lines of communication open is really going to be important. But certainly we don't want anybody to feel like they are trapped in isolation without the ability to make a different choice to go off campus if it's safe to do so.
Great, thank you for that. That answers a lot of questions that were waiting here in the queue. Some more specific questions from that. If a student goes home after finding out they were exposed to someone who is positive, how do they get clearance to return to campus? Is a negative test result after a period of time and 14 days in isolation sufficient? So you talked about receiving that clearance from Student Health Services to come back. Do you know the details of what the clearance to receive that clearance looks like?
So the length of the isolation it has several factors that go into that medical recommendation. So it is the test results, the exposure and when a person was exposed, as well as what the CDC guidelines are. And so while it is not necessarily a mandate that somebody that goes into isolation because they were exposed then gets a negative test before they're allowed to come to campus. That's not necessarily a required protocol. somebody being asymptomatic, right? So we certainly don't want people coming out of isolation if it is that that they develop symptoms. But all of that, I really need to refer to Dr. Puccio when he comes on next week, or to the medical staff if you need to have that answer before then. But there are lots of different factors, and it includes whether it's positive, whether it's a high risk, when the last point of exposure from or with the positive case, whether somebody has symptoms. So each case is really unique. And so I wouldn't want to make a blanket statement other than to say that we're following CDC guidelines, and there are lots of factors that are being taken into consideration.
Great, thank you. I'm going through the rest of these questions here, just making sure that we're getting to all of them. So some duplicate questions about if they are placed in isolation here on campus, how do they get that clearance? I know that we just talked about specifically when they're home with their families how to come back to campus, but if they're in isolation here on campus, what are the steps to get the clearance to go back to their normal assigned residence hall?
The protocol is that they would be contacted by Student Health Services, just as they would contacted on the front end to notify them either that they have tested positive, that they need to come in to get a test, or that they've been identified as a close contact of a positive case. On the back end, Student Health Services would also let the students know that they were cleared to leave. Student Health Services would then notify housing, because what housing needs to do is to let the student know sort of what the exiting process is, where they should put their keys, that they can use their carts, the carts that are available, and probably most importantly, that we can turn the access back on, so when they arrive back to their original assignment, they're able to get into their building. And so that would be the same that would happen if a student is off campus, is that they would be contacted by Student Health Services. For residential students, they would contact housing, we would turn their access back on, and then students would be able to return. So, so anything that has to do with the initiation or the closure of isolation is really notification from Student Health Services. They're in communication with housing, but housing doesn't make those decisions. We just respond to the information that we're given.
And are students being tested after they've been put in isolation? That's a couple of questions we've received about that as well. So are they continued to be testing throughout their experience in isolation?
Again, it depends on their particular circumstances. So we have had students that were tested in isolation. Most of those individuals were people that started in isolation being identified as a close contact. And then because of the incubation of the coronavirus, it may be advisable that they are tested several days into that last contact. And so again, Student Health Services would let them know if that was necessary and then make arrangements for that test. It may be that what we try to do as much as possible is to get all the testing done before it is that a student goes into isolation. And there may be 2 or 3 levels of tests. There may be a pool test that they get, then there may be an initial more rapid test that they get. And then while they're at Student Health Services getting the rapid test, they may get the full PCR test. PCR test results take a little while to come back, usually several days, or could be several days. And so we try to get all the testing done before the student goes into isolation so that we can have the best information, so that we can predict what that experience is going to look like, length of stay, et cetera. But some of that also may be informed by whether a student develops symptoms while they're in isolation as well. So the testing requirement, if a student is tested while they're in isolation, all of that is going to be based on the recommendations from Student Health Services, and then we support the students and make those arrangements for them to be able to get those tests while they're in isolation. So again, disclosure, especially for those who weren't here at the beginning, I am not a medical professional. I've just worked very closely with them. And so I'm repeating answers that I have heard them say. But we're very fortunate that we're going to have Dr. Joe Puccio available for a similar live broadcast like this next week. And he can really dive deep into all of the logistics and all of the medical detail that I certainly am not qualified to provide for that guidance. But I do know that we have top-notch medical professionals, public health professionals, and their practices are aligned with CDC guidelines.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, we look forward to having Dr. Puccio on the show. Next week, we're going to be releasing that information on when to expect his appearance on the show, and I'll definitely be pulling the questions that have come from family members and students watching that are more geared towards the student health services side of things, and we'll be sure to bring that up to Dr. Puccio when we speak with him next week. So a question for you about housing and the move from a student's residential space to their isolation space. A question that we're seeing come through is if a student doesn't have a car and their space is far from them, their isolation space is far from where they're currently located, will they receive assistance in moving their things? How will they get their items over to their new space without a vehicle if it's more than walking distance?
Yeah. So unfortunately, we don't have access to vehicles that we would be able to do that transport. And so, what we're doing is providing the carts for students to be able to roll across campus if that's what's necessary with regard to getting from their home base to their isolation location. Obviously, those students would be given a little bit more time to make that trip. And we're trying to support them the best we can, but it wouldn't be safe for us to provide transportation to somebody that has been designated as somebody that needs to go into isolation. And so, unfortunately, the best that we're able to do right now is to provide those carts, and we can give them multiple carts if that's what they need to move their belongings. But that's what we've been able to use, and we have had several students that have come from locations that are a little further from our isolation location, and it seems to have worked out okay for them.
All right, and I'm marking some questions here that all are a similar theme about support. So I'm going to lump some of these questions together. The first one I see here is, if a student's health declines while in isolation, who checks in with them in the event that they may need to be hospitalized? Some similar questions that go along that theme is, who's physically checking in on them? How many people? And then a unique question we received as well is, can a family send their personal doctor to go check on them if they wish to do so?
So let me take the last one first, because I don't know the answer to that question. What I would do is to have the student make a telehealth appointment and make that request through Student Health Services, because my inclination, I'm sure that there's a protocol about that. The private physician would not be permitted in the isolation hall, but if it is that there needed to be a medical visit that took place in person with somebody that is an outside medical professional, I would need to check with Student Health Services on how that would work. And so if the individual would like to email me specifically, that's a pretty unique question. And so I'm happy to try to get the answer to that. For the first part of your question about the support and who's checking in with the students physically. So the isolation protocol is that there's no physical contact between the staff that are supporting them and the student that is in isolation. We have the physical indicator that a student is well enough to open a door and get their food. And so we do check to make sure that students have picked up their meals that have been delivered to them on a daily basis. We want to encourage anybody that is not feeling well at any time, not wait until it gets to an emergency type of situation. But if they're not feeling well, they should make a telehealth appointment. Students that are in isolation are going to get priority with regard to that outreach. And student health will be available. They can be available on a daily basis. They can do daily check-ins. Students just really need to initiate what that looks like for them, and need to either answer the call, show up for the appointment, and kind of navigate that. And then again, the COVID care team is available at any time. And so just as we're doing this virtual check-in, that's what can be arranged as well, is so that you can lay eyes on the student and or the student lay eyes on the staff member that is supporting them through our team's environment. I know there were three questions. Did I hit all three?
Yeah, that covers it with
Okay.
just in regards to the amount of people and how they're having that physical checkup from the team. A unique question as well is Jennifer's asking, are there any plans to schedule fresh air time for students in isolation? Is this possible for them to get out of their rooms?
So it isn't possible or safe for them to leave their rooms. So there isn't, you get your 15 minutes in the park kind of experience. It really is when they go in their rooms, they need to stay in their rooms. We are fortunate that students have the ability to open their windows, not remove their screens, but open their windows to get fresh air if that is what if that's what they want to do. We're always tricky, as you probably are in your own homes, with regard to, if you have air conditionings and controlled environments, and then you have a lot of windows that are open, then that sort of messes up the balance of those environments. But if that's something that students feel the need, and they need to open the windows, not remove their screens, and then close their windows after their fresh air break is over, they can certainly do that.
And is anybody monitoring fevers during the isolation period? Going back to the physical check-in.
One of the things that we note in our packing list, our recommended packing list, is that students bring a thermometer to campus, and especially if it is that they're going into isolation, and that's something that they report out to student health services if it is that they develop a fever. But there isn't anybody that is physically going to check temperatures of students in isolation, if that's what the question is.
I believe so, yes, but that's a great point to make sure that the student brings their thermometer to make sure that they're monitoring their temperature. And then to that point also with the packing list, Christy's asking, what happens if a student forgets something important from their room, a book, a calculator? Is there a mechanism or a process where someone can go retrieve it and send it to them?
So we try to limit that to essential items. And so if it was something that they needed for their academics, so you use calculator as an example, if that's something that they need, then we would do our best to be able to retrieve that. I will tell you that there may be a delay in doing that, just so that we can follow the environmental health and safety protocols with regard to entering a room where we know somebody has recently been that is positive. And so it takes some planning, and we need to kind of navigate what that means so that the staff member that goes in is appropriately equipped with their personal protective equipment, and to try to navigate whether we can wait the 24 hours or the 48 hours before we go to retrieve that item. We're really trying to look for students' cooperation in trying to think of as many things as they can, which is why we give them a very extensive packing list. But we know that that's going to happen, and we have done that, and we have retrieved some critical items that students need for their academics, if they forgot medication, etc. So we'll try to do our best to figure out the best way to support the need that is identified. And so that is a request that should go through their COVID care team member as soon as they know that that item is missing or that they're going to be in need of that.
And going back to carts and students moving their items across campus, we are getting some questions about them specifically. If carts are available at each residence hall, if they're bringing the carts to the student, and if a student's not feeling well, if they are going into isolation due to being positive and they're just not physically up to it, what are their options?
So we would ask that student to let student health services know that they're feeling weak, and that is not something that they would be able to do, so that we can talk about that specific case and figure out what is the most appropriate way to support that student and that student's needs. If it is that they just need more time, that may be something that we are able to accommodate. Otherwise, we'll take the guidance from the medical professionals as to what it is that we might need to do to support the students in that way. What was the first part of the question? That would be if somebody was positive and too sick to make the move. What was the first part?
Yeah, the first part was where the carts are located and if they're brought to the student that is going to be making the move.
So generally, we make the carts available in the isolation location. So students are given access to that building. They can pick up a cart, retrieve their belongings, and then when they return to the isolation building, they're able to bring that cart into their rooms so that they can use that for the move out process as well. If it is that there's a great distance between where the student is and where the isolation designation is, then we have a way to provide a cart for the student more closely to their home base. And so we would give students specific instructions on where they would be able to retrieve a cart in that case. But again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to limit the student contact with the staff contact and try to provide as many no contact options as we can, both for the safety of the community, the safety for the staff that are servicing the buildings and or supporting the students.
Got it. Thank you. And to that, is Student Health Services coordinating with housing to move a student back into their room after they're done in their isolation, or does a student need to try and contact housing specifically for the move? Like, what is the process for the coordination of that?
Sure. So the students should be contacted directly by the student health professional to let them know that they're eligible to leave isolation or return to campus from isolation, and that they would be contacted by a housing staff member or the COVID care team contact with regard to the logistics of that. Then Student Health Services would then make a call and reach out to housing to let us know that student had been cleared. Then the housing contact would let the appropriate people know so that we can turn the access on to the students. I'm going to call it the student's home base, their original residence hall assignment. And then the student would be notified that they're authorized to leave isolation and be able to return. And then what we would ask is that the students pack up all of their belongings, throw away the trash, basically try to leave the room as clean as possible, basically just like we do when students move out of a regular residence hall room. And then they can take the cart with them and then return the cart to the lobby of the isolation building. And then their access to the isolation building would be turned off.
Got it. And this question has come up a couple of times as well. If a student is released from isolation and then is around another student that is positive or they're exposed in some way again, does the student have to go into isolation again?
So again, we're going to take the direction from our medical professionals that as to who it is that needs to go into isolation. What I would recommend is one, if a student is selected for random testing or student is identified as a close contact, and it is that they have been positive or have gone through, well, mostly have been positive, because just because you've gone through isolation doesn't necessarily mean you won't have to go through isolation again, unfortunately. But if it is that a student has tested positive in the past, that would certainly be medical information that they should share with the medical professional that contacts them, just so that the medical professional has the full picture to be able to make the determination as to whether a student would need to go into isolation again. But I do know from experiences that we've had, not student experiences, but staff experiences, that somebody has been exposed. They need to isolate for a certain period of time. A couple months later, they may have been exposed to somebody different, whether it is on campus or whether it is their son or their daughter or whatever that may be, and then they needed to go into isolation again. Neither time did that individual test positive, which was a good thing, but just for the abundance of caution, there is that isolation protocol that remains. It changes a little bit, I believe, but again, not a medical professional. It would be a great question to ask Dr. Puccio next week. There's a bit of a different nuance and consideration if it is somebody that has tested positive in the past and has completed the isolation due to a positive test.
Got it. And to that point, I'll definitely add that question for the list for Dr. Puccio, as well as the rest of the questions that are coming in that are very health related, student health services related. I'll save that for next week. Because I know we are approaching about 2 hours. I'm going to try to get through some more questions that are coming from the audience. We have great participation tonight, so I want to thank everyone who tuned in to ask their questions. Some questions are questions that have been answered earlier in the broadcast, so what we're going to do is take this video and it's going to be available to everyone watching after the broadcast is over. So anyone that wasn't able to join us tonight or wants to go back and re-watch it to get the information that they may have missed can start from the beginning after the broadcast. But like I said, we're going to get through a few more. The next question I want to talk about is from Brenda, asking if the COVID care team members that we've been talking about that have been supporting the students, are they medical professionals or mental health workers? Who are they, for those that are watching and want to know more about those team members?
Sure. So the COVID care team is sort of all-encompassing, but the specific members that I've been referring to basically is the point of contact. Those are individuals who come from our student affairs, student success staff, our residential education staff, and Dean of Students office. And so those are individuals that are trained professionals to basically liaison with the student. In addition to that, we have the medical professionals from student health services that are also contacts. And we have counseling services, and there are counseling numbers that are available to students throughout their stay that are specifically trained counselors that may be able to help students through some anxiety, some isolation, and or if they just want to talk through some difficulties that they may be having. So there are lots of people that are part of the support team that is connected and helping students, in addition to the dining staff that I had mentioned. But when I've been referring to throughout this broadcast of the COVID care team member, it is really that direct liaison with the student to get them connected to the right resources. And those are student success professionals that are trained, and that is their profession, is to support students and help them be successful in their endeavors at the university.
Got it. Thank you. And that answers some more questions that came in about mental health support and the other types of support that are available to students, which we'll definitely go over next week as well with Dr. Puccio. A question about cleaning that came in is, are the rooms students came from being disinfected while they are in isolation? So if a student is coming from their residence hall, whether they share it with someone else or not, will that be disinfected on behalf of the student and if they have a roommate?
So we are following the guidance from Environmental Health and Safety and the CDC with regard to the requirements for any cleaning that would be necessary. The general feedback that we have received, because many students are leaving the space and they're going to be gone from the space for 14 days, is that whatever virus was present on the surfaces would not be on the surfaces in 14 days. And so therefore there is a need to enter the student rooms. And so what we do is we restrict access to the rooms so that we don't have people that are being exposed to that. And so again, if it is that there was a need for us to change that protocol in some way, we would be advised by either our environmental health and safety or our medical professionals that we would need to change that protocol. But based on the information that we have and the dynamics that exist with students being out of the space and the way that the virus can, and the length of time that a virus can live on a surface, and the guidance that we've received, that would not be something that was part of our routine, that we would enter a student's room, their original student room, in order to clean that space after they leave.
Got it. And the USF telehealth calls and the COVID testing that we've talked about throughout the broadcast, we're getting some questions on if there's a cost to those services.
Those services are covered through the for students. It's covered through the student health services fee, and so students should be very liberal in using those services, as all students should be. You know, if they have a need, we want them to get connected, because the investment that we have in trying to keep students healthy and the campus safe is really important. So we'd rather err on people being more connected to our student health right now than have a hesitation about utilizing those services. Same thing with our mental health services as well. Is, you know, we specifically are talking about students in isolation, but this is a stressful time for everybody, right? People are learning new academic modalities, being online, having restrictions with regard to what their access to get together with friends are, having online fatigue. So anytime somebody thinks that talking to somebody would help in their ability to navigate their success here at USF, we certainly want to encourage them to reach out and utilize the resources that are available, including the counseling services, including student health services.
It's a great point. I'm going to make sure that everyone's staying physically and mentally healthy as well through the support that's offered through the university. So we'll go into some wrap-up questions. The last couple of questions that I'm seeing are, what is the process if a student does not respond to a check-in in a certain time frame, their well-being checks and that sort of thing? So what's the process? How long do you give a student to go unanswered by a staff member before there's a physical check-in with that student?
So I think that this is probably best for Dr. Puccio to answer with regard to the time frame and how that alert would happen, because they really are the primary point of contact for the students' health needs. I will tell you from a campus perspective on what the protocol would be is that we would initiate what's called a wellness check, which is, if it is that we have a concern about a member of our community, then we would contact the emergency personnel to then go to the room to make that contact. And if it is that we needed to physically enter the room, then the staff would be able to do that and to respond. Most of the time when we do wellness checks, it is more the student just didn't feel like responding. It is very rare that we find an issue as part of our wellness checks. And I'm not talking specifically about isolation, but just our wellness checks in total. But if there's a concern, we would rather be safe than sorry. And so if a student or a family member has a concern about somebody, we certainly want them to reach out to the resources that are available, and then we will respond. We want to make sure that again, students are supported and that we're providing a safe environment. And so we have mechanisms that can be put into play. The specific time frame with regard to if there's a lack of response and what triggers that, that would probably be Dr. Puccio would be best suited to answer that question.
Great. We'll be sure to ask that of him next week. And then some final question I have for you before asking for your final thoughts are some questions about communication with housing@usf.edu, that email. Some questions on what should be the expectation for response time to that email and the communication back from our team if there are specific questions that viewers may have, when they can expect to hear back if they have a question.
Sure. So I have a limited staff, all working remotely, trying to handle the volume of both calls as well as emails that are coming in related to COVID, not related to COVID. So just general assignment questions that people may have as well. And so I think that the automatic email that comes back is that you should expect a response within 48 to 72 hours. I think that usually we try to make sure that the response is within 24 hours if we can do that. I'm happy to have folks to reach out again to parent and family programs. I know that they have an intake form and they have a system that's in place, and they're very communicative. If there's an urgent issue that can't wait for that cycle to happen. But I had a meeting with all of the staff that respond to the housing@usf.edu emails. Try to provide them some additional information. We'll be providing them some additional information with regard to updates that we have from questions that you've been asking this evening as well, to prepare them to answer those questions in the future. But if there's a concern, please don't hesitate to escalate. If there's any kind of urgent issue, again, my name's Ana Hernandez. You can reach out to me, and I will do my best to try to respond to urgent issues as quickly as I can.
Thank you for that, Ana. Thank you for your openness with communication as well. And before we go tonight, do you have any final thoughts and words for the viewers, families, parents, and students that are watching regarding COVID-19, isolation, and the on-campus experience?
Sure. The first thing that I want to say is I'm very proud for our campus in general and the student body that we have here at USF. While it's difficult to navigate all of the new restrictions and requirements, I really think that our students are trying to comply and trying to be safe. And occasionally they need some reminders about how far 6 feet actually is, and making sure that they may be eating at the time, but they need to put their masks on immediately after they're finished actively eating, and those kinds of things. But for the most part, students have understood the restrictions that we have and the intent of the restrictions that we have. And with our surveillance strategies and our testing, we seem to have been successful thus far with the cooperation of our students in being careful and being good citizens of our campus community, and taking on some personal responsibility and really caring for those that are around them. And so I want to, if we can elicit any support from our students and families to have students just continue on that behavior and to help us be successful in that way, that would be great. I think the other piece is, as much as communication from the university is important, we really are trying to focus a lot of our support from the COVID care team, from the dining support team, directly with the students, so that we can have that real time response. And have students advocate for themselves, let us know what it is that they need. And so that would be the biggest support from the families, is if it is that we can help students be successful in navigating the systems that are in place, because that helps us make sure that there aren't a lot of things that fall through the cracks. But we spent 2 hours now more than 2 hours on this live broadcast, and so I've shared with you what my expectations are, what the systems are that we have in place, some of the limitations that we have. If it is that your students are reporting to you that that's not what they're experiencing, we need to know about that so that we can respond. And so that's really helpful, again, to use the systems that we have in place with our parent and family programs, with our housing at usf.edu, to help get the information to the people that may be able to do something about that, because we want our students safe. We want our students to be able to be successful. And then finally, the understanding that people have, that I have also seen, especially on some of the social media pages, that this is all new to us. we are really trying to balance student safety, staff safety, the feasibility of certain things, the capacity that we have to do lots of different things that we haven't had to do before. I'm really proud of the staff that are invested in the isolation and the isolation support and all the preparation that goes into play there. And I try to boost their spirits, because sometimes they see some criticism, and we want ways to be better, right? We want that, but to try to give us some grace, and we're trying to give students grace as well in that dynamic. It just helps us. But it's not that you shouldn't expect your students to be supported. We want to make sure that happens, and we want to make sure that the right people get the information so that we can respond effectively. So that's what I would say. Clearly there's an appetite here for information and lots of questions. I am, and I'm working with Julia and her team to make myself available. We'll probably make this a weekly thing, because as it is that students and families may be really invested in isolation right now because their students are directly impacted, the families next week are going to be a whole different set of families. And so I'm trying to just be sensitive as to what is the information that we can share, how is it that students best hear the information, and what's the best way to provide the resources to the families, so that they know sort of what's happening if they're not getting that direct communication from their students. And so we're going to try to do our best to help students understand, help families understand, what does isolation mean on our campus, and what they can expect. And so I'm glad to have this opportunity, and hopefully we've answered most of the questions. We're going to update our frequently asked questions based on some of the information that's been provided here, and hopefully that's an ongoing resource that students can use, families can use, and they can refer others to.
Absolutely. And Anna, on behalf of our team and the students on campus, we want to thank you so much for your leadership and support throughout this time. I know, like you said, that it's nothing that any of us could have guessed or expected to be dealing with. So you've been great throughout all of this too. So thank you for that. And you're right in that there is definitely a need and a request for information, because we have nearly 200 comments on the stream tonight. So thank you so much to everyone that are watching and the great questions that you have. This is really going to inform us with the information that we're going to update on the website. So like Anna said, we're going to post a link to an updated frequently asked question page regarding isolation spaces. By tomorrow, we'll have that information updated on the website, as well as this video, so that you can go back and watch this video and gather the information if you've missed part of it. We'll get this on the frequently asked question page on our YouTube and Facebook page as well. So thank you so much, Ana, for taking the couple hours out of your evening to speak with us this evening and get through these questions. We will be speaking with you and Dr. Puccio again next week. We are just solidifying that date and time, and we'll be announcing that on Facebook and emailing students so they have access to the link, and posting it on parent and family engagement as well as soon as possible. So I want to thank everyone again for taking the time to join us this evening and for your amazing questions. And thank you, Ana, and to our production crew here. And I hope that you all have a great night. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Julia.